This is Josh Horn. This is Selling Your Family Business, and I really appreciate your time today. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and a couple of things I want to mention out of the gate. This is a tough love session for the most part. I'm not going to pull any punches because I think you, as a business owner or the advisor to the business owner, does not need to look at this through rose colored glasses. The odds of being able to do this are low. And I'm going to go into the statistics a little bit later, but it's not impossible. It's difficult, but not impossible. The other thing I want to mention is this is obviously my experience and yours may be different. You may have colleagues, other people that have done this differently than what I'm going to present it to today. I would say that the odds of you as the business owner or your client selling to private equity or a public company are very low. Now, you don't want to just dismiss it out of hand or turn them away, but I would put the odds very low. A little bit about me. I'm the owner of Horn Valuation, and I do work in this area, which is largely M&A, mergers and acquisitions, estate and gift, and litigation. I've been a CVA since 2008, CPA much longer than that. I'm hoping I can live up to that Instructor of the Year award, or at least partially, that I got from NACVA. If you want to dig down into my CV, it's on my website. We're not going to spend any more time on that. So here's the agenda for today. First, I want to start with some bad news. I'm going to set the stage for what we know to be the case in this world around selling your family business, what that looks like. A Tale of ABC Company, which is a fictional company, but very similar to many of the clients I've had over the years. Misconceptions about selling, buyer turnoffs, the good news, and there is some good news, real life good news. How to raise the odds of selling. It's going to be a section, and then I'm going to tell you the math that drives the value of your company, what actions that you can do to drive that value higher, a plan you can use today, which is a broad-based plan for many different types of scenarios, and then one parting thought, which I hope will leave you with the motivation to continue after this. And that's the most important thing. That is truly the most important thing, is that when you're done, I hope you don't just put it away and forget about it. I hope you pick up the phone, get some things put on your calendar, and get moving on this, because it's the daily actions that matter. You can't eat an elephant in one bite, as they say. You got to eat it one bite at a time. So let's start with the bad news. Roughly 6 million businesses in the United States that are employer owned, and about 3 million of those are owned by people within 10 years of traditional retirement. So about half the 6 million are owned by people 55 or over. Here are the expectations based on the survey data, that 74% expect sale or transfer. Those are positive outcomes. They're going to sell to someone else, or another company, a group of people, or they're going to transfer it. And the transfers are largely going to be gifting scenarios. So those are positive outcomes. Closing and unsure are the other two categories based on the survey data. It allowed them to answer it that way. So that translates into these actual numbers on the 3 million. The reality is much harsher based on the data we have. Of the 510,000, roughly 500,000 businesses that exited in 2022, only 5 sold, 3 transferred, and 92% were closed. And there's the actual number. So the expectation was 11% closed, and it was actually 92%. Sales and transfers, 8%. Here's the thing. What we know based on the survey data is that only 1/3 of this group has a written plan. And I think that is a big part of what moves the needle here. Your business is more likely to close than sell. And that's a sad thing to say, but statistically it is. And what we're here to do today is move you in the direction of where you have a higher percentage chance of being able to sell it or transfer it. Now, of course, a transfer, generally speaking, isn't going to put money in your pocket. That's typically going to be something you file a gift tax return when you transfer it to someone else. But that's still, in my mind, still a more successful outcome than turning the key and closing the door forever, right? Okay, let's talk about ABC Company. This is a fictional business, a fictional family business, but it's like many that I've consulted with and helped over the years. Bob is age 50, and no sexism intended here. A lot of female owned businesses in my community and throughout the United States. I just use somebody simple here to make it easy. So, Bob is the 100% owner of ABC Company. It is a profitable manufacturing business. He works a heavy schedule, 70 hours a week. He's the sole earner for a family of four with two kids that work at ABC when they have time. Here's some rough numbers on what Bob is drawing out of the business, his family expenses, and his worth, his net worth on paper, assets less liabilities, is approximately $1 million without ABC. And why is that the case? Because Bob has not had an exit plan done. He's not talked to any potential buyers, and he's not had ABC valued. So he doesn't know what it could be worth. The lack of a plan is the key. That's the thing I want to drive home here. Okay, a family disaster. Bob dies. ABC would have been worth 2 million with a good team, but because Bob was the single point of failure, ABC falls apart. The salespeople leave, they take the customers, and his spouse can't find a buyer. So the value goes to zero. It has to be liquidated. Life insurance can't cover the gap. And the upshot is Bob's gone. 100% of the family income is gone. 2/3 of potential family net worth is gone. And a lot of employees are out of work. And so just make sure you understand the math on this. I said Bob's net worth was $1 million without ABC, $3 million with it. That's the 2/3. Okay. Now, I've had a couple of instances, not exactly like Bob, but I've had a couple of situations where they were very near misses like this. And the family member had already jumped into the driver's seat because they saw this coming around the corner. What I've seen more recently, which is causing a similar disaster, is the mental decline of the owner. And I had a couple of these just in the last couple of years. They seem to be accelerating. One was my client. I consulted with him as a potential seller. He did sell to a large private company, and I think he did pretty well on that. He was deceased within a year of that transaction, year or two of that transaction. So that was a sad situation. The problem was is that we would sit down and talk, and we'd have to have the same conversation over and over again because he couldn't remember where we'd left off. So that was really challenging and sad. And I have another client in another community. We dealt mostly remotely, and his father was in a similar state. And he was having the same thing where every time they'd sit down, they just have to rehash it. There are a lot of Bobs out there that are older than 50 and facing this risk. So this is not something that is just made up. This is legitimately real. I see this everywhere. So let's talk about some misconceptions. I wrote about this in my blog yesterday. And again, more tough love, but I hear these a lot, so they're out there. My son or daughter will buy it. Are they interested? Have you talked to them? I see this a lot where there's an assumption that the family member is going to buy it, but they haven't had a conversation, a real conversation. They have the money. I see this one a lot, and it's based a lot on status symbols and what they see in the community. Maybe that potential buyer is kind of a local celebrity. You need to find out if they really have the money to buy the business. I will get paid up front. Most of these deals are done owner financing because people typically can't write million and plus dollar checks. It's worth annual sales. This is a really common one that people really get disappointed on. I don't know where this comes from, but it's all out there. I guess as the joke goes, if it's on the internet, it must be true, right? Haha. This means basically if I have sales of $5 million, that I'm going to sell my business for $5 million. That's really rare. The profitability, the growth has to justify that level of value. And somebody's got to be willing to pay that for it. I'm sure my competitor will buy it. This is one that I see a lot too. They really just kind of know each other somewhat even informally. They know they're across town or whatever, but they haven't really asked. Look at all that inventory and equipment. It's worth at least that. Not necessarily. Not if you can't turn it into a profit. Potential. Someone's going to pay for all this potential. Well, if the potential's there, why haven't you done it? And I see this one. I call this barstool valuation. My friend got 10 times EBITDA. Do you know anything about that deal and how it went down? It might be quite uncomfortable. It's not your friend's responsibility to show you the documentation, but if you're close, you might ask, say, okay, can I see the documentation if you're comfortable with it and see how the deal went down? Because a lunch or a coffee or a beer is not going to establish what actually went down in the deal. Some of these deals are quite complicated. So it's important to understand what actually went down and not just hear the whatever 5, 6, 7, 10 times EBITDA and go, oh yeah, I'm sure that's what they sold it for. Because the devil's in the details. Buyer turnoffs, high owner dependency. Your buyer does not want to have to push a rock up a hill on day one. All right. That's not attractive to them. Customer concentration. See this one a lot. Value in companies. It can be a challenging thing to get away from. Let me describe it. Basically, this means a situation where there's not a set percentage, but certainly once you're at 50%, 60, 70, 80, 90% of your sales are with one customer, that customer picks up the phone, says, I don't want to do business anymore. Your business could be gone after that phone call, one call away from oblivion, as I like to call it. That's terrifying, and it's terrifying to a potential buyer. So they see that, they potentially get really scared. So what you want to do, if at all possible, is work your way out of this. Try to have a real attack mode of adding customers that are going to pull you out of that concentration. Poor accounting. I see this one a lot when I'm consulting with buyers. And so I'm consulting the buyer on what information to ask for and get financial statements and this and that. And those financials come back and they're screwed up. The balance sheet in particular, that's usually a sign of problems where you've got negative cash and negative receivables and payables are backwards. And so at that point, we have no idea what we have. We have no idea whether this business is profitable or strong or any of that. Books are a mess. So that's a real problem. Lack of systems for HR, systems for errors, systems for hiring, customer damage, something like that, all kinds of things, accounting systems, how we close the books. Do you have those or do you wing it? chain of command, slow response time. As I was going through this, something I thought of, I see this. If you are the owner, you're trying to hire people to work for your company, and if you have an opportunity to find out why they didn't accept an offer, some of these things are on this list too. And what I mean by that is they will see these things and they'll decide, I don't want to work there because they scare me. Like I can't tell who I'm going to be reporting to. These systems, there's non-existent systems, they're winging it. So there's some real overlap with people you might want to hire in your company. They'll see these things and they might alert you to go, hey, we need to really deal with this before somebody wants to buy our company because it's going to come up again. Unprofessional staff. I've got a story. It's not a long story, but this is a true story. And thankfully, that company is not doing this anymore because I was back recently, many years later. And so they're much more professional now. But I remember doing a site visit for this company, and the person who was at the front desk walked out from behind the desk and she was barefoot. Now, is that going to send a professional image to somebody that wants to buy your company? Probably not. Outdated equipment, it doesn't necessarily have to be bright, shiny, and new. I think you don't want it to look like everything is sort of unkept and falling apart, and it sends a bad image in most instances. So here, one thing I see, it's kind of under this category. I don't really have it as a separate category, but one thing I see that's problematic is kind of the technology piece, in that some companies are running software that's really old and not supported anymore. And that can be a real problem because a prospective buyer is going to look at that and go, well, I'm going to have to upgrade the software as soon as I buy this. And that's going to cost me 5 figures, 6 figures, who knows? And that's really, that's a scare for them. So in some instances, you may have to bite off upgrading your software before somebody will consider buying the company. That's a possibility. Here's some good news. These are real life stories from my practice. Daughter buys out her father, employee buys out boss, large private company buys my client. Do you notice any similarities? I think you probably will, but let me just sit on that for just a moment. This is how I see it work most often in my practice. So let's talk about how to raise the odds of selling. Three broad parts to your business. The idea for this comes from this book, Traction. I'm kind of covering up the letters, and I've got some other pieces out of this book. I also use this thought process when I value companies. Generally speaking, broadly, you have marketing and sales, you have operations, and you have accounting. You could argue that there's other subgroups and this and that, but these are really the primary three pieces. How do you get leads, attract customers, and how well do you turn them into customers, into paying customers? How do you deliver your product or service? And how do you count the beans, basically? Broadly, that's what we're doing. I like to refer to operations, and this is important for later, I think, as where the sausage gets made. It's messy. There are errors there. There are mistakes. The key is to try to minimize those errors and mistakes over time. You're getting better. It's where the customers get upset. That's where it happens in operations. The other two, mostly, I think, pretty self-explanatory based on the definitions. I will say the accounting piece, I'm very accounting centric because that's the world I come from. I would say that in a lot of cases, this accounting definition is not necessarily what the accounting department is doing, but what it should be doing. It should be delivering data to the other two areas about where the company can improve without doing the shame and blame thing, saying, hey, I see we're bringing in these we're having meetings with potential customers. We're not turning them into customers. Operations, hey, we're making a lot of mistakes out there. People are getting hurt, etc. Those kinds of things. That's what accounting should be doing in addition to the debits, the credits, the financial statements, and that kind of stuff. I think that's good. So what you want to do is, what I see a lot is the owner is usually heavily involved in one of these three areas. And what you want to do is, the owner, you want to start to pull yourself out of that. I'm going to get into this later about how you can do that, but grade all of them on a letter grade, and you want to get them all up to a B or better. Let's talk about the big three, a different big three, the valuation big three: cash flow, growth, and risk. And what we're doing here is mathematically how we get to a higher value for the company. If the cash flow goes up, the growth goes up, the risk goes down, the value of the company goes up. Pretty easy to understand conceptually. And I'm intentionally making this very simple. I have advanced models to do valuation, but really when you get down to brass tacks, this is really it under the income approach. This is really what we're doing. Value is a future-looking concept. Similar if you want to buy NVIDIA or Facebook or Caterpillar or whatever, you don't much care what they did yesterday or last year or 5 years ago. You care where that company is going. And so your potential buyer is thinking about it the same way. What's the future hold for the company? Now we're going to dust off the old algebra book. Bear with me a bit. And this is just a basic, we're solving for V, cash flow times 1 plus growth divided by risk minus growth. That's how that works. A simple formula. You're going to have all the slides. If you want to dig into this or you want to phone me later, I'm happy to take a call on that. And here's a simple example of how that would work. We're going to solve for V when our cash flow, and by the way, cash flow is synonymous with profit. I want to push in on this just a minute. Just for the sake of understanding, we're talking about cash flow, we're talking about profit. It's usually a little less. So this is what it would look like when cash flow is 450, growth is 2%, risk is 25%. That simplifies into 459,000 divided by a 23% cap rate and a $2 million value. All right. Just again, if you haven't done your algebra for a while, that's okay. I've walked you through it here. It's basically that. Now, what happens if all three are better? And that's what we're working towards. We want that value to go up. What would have to happen for that to work? Well, if all three were better, and sometimes we may just have time to work on one or two, but let's say all three were better. We got $500,000 of cash flow, 3% growth, and 20% risk. That's our future looking projected numbers. And as you can imagine, that's going to be a higher value. That's $3 million. Increase the value of the business by $1 million. Now, hopefully you're probably asking, Josh, how do we do that? That's what we're going to talk about next. How do we move the big three? What are some tangible things we can do to get that value of your business higher? Cash flow, close to my heart. I talk about this all the time, social media, blog posts, wherever. My experience is, and there's a couple of reasons for this, my experience is a lot of business owners don't look at the cash flow statement. And I think that's the most important financial statement there is. And I think there's a couple of reasons why. I think one, there's a exception for CPAs where they don't have to produce that report. And a lot of times they utilize that exception to not produce that financial statement. So if you're getting compiled financial statements from your CPA or accountant, may not have the cash flow statement. The other reason is I think it's because it's a pain in the neck to prepare, but it provides very, very valuable information about what the business is doing. And what you'll find is that sometimes you're profitable, but you get to the end of the month and you don't have any cash. And the reason why is because largely, it's almost always, it's buried in the balance sheet. And the cash flow statement is the interaction between the P&L, or the income statement as it's called, and the balance sheet. And so when those two come together, they create either positive or negative cash flow. And so that's why it's so important to look at this, and it will alert you as to whether you have to work on something in your business. Then we can move over after we understand the cash flow statement. Typically, what I like to do is then move over to the balance sheet and figure out how strong is this business, because the profit is already embedded in the cash flow statement. We can actually sometimes look at the P&L last in some instances if we're trying to fix the business, if we're trying to make it better. If you have inventory, receivables, payables, those things impact your working capital and can squeeze the cash that you have available in the business. And then if you have debt, you have principal payments to make, that is also impacting cash flow. Now, one thing that I want to point out here, we don't have time to do a deep dive in the valuation theory and application here, but what we're working towards are arm's length cash flow. We want your arm's length cash flow. So what you're doing in terms of how you run it may not be an arm's length arrangement. What do I mean by that? Well, is your compensation arm's length, or is it some kind of a sort of a tax managed situation or something like that? Something that was set and forgot about years ago. And what will we have to pay somebody to do your duties now? Rent expense for the building. I ran into this one, and it was a sad situation, really, but unfortunately not that uncommon. What is common a lot of times is the business operates out of a building that the owner also owns. And it's legal and common to pay a rent out of the business to the owner or their LLC, and they pick it up as rent income on their tax return. It's an expense on the books of the business. All fine, right? Except when you don't do it and you're clicking along like this gentleman was and thinking you're doing a lot better profitability wise. And then I impute the rent and the profit shrinks to almost nothing, which is a situation I ran into. And so it's important to understand, especially for you advisors out there, if you're seeing financial statements, you need to understand, is this financial statement on an arm's length basis, or is this just purely based on what the owner likes to do? Because those financial statements are going to be recast when somebody wants to buy the business. If they're serious, they're going to adjust all that stuff, and it may shrink the profit. It may grow the profit. Who knows? We don't know. In essence, you need to make sure that's arm's length. Okay, how do we get more cash flow? I can't dig into every single thing to do, but when I think back over the years doing valuation work, almost none of my clients at that time had done any benchmark to their peer group in their industry code. Now, it's first and most important to understand what NAICS code they're in. So what NAICS code are you in? Do you know your NAICS code for your industry? If you don't, it's a good idea to get on the Census Bureau site and find that out. I found that a lot of companies are doing something different than they were before COVID. And so they may have actually changed the business model, and the numbers of codes have just expanded dramatically. So what we're doing with this is we're trying to find out how you shake out. Are you more or less profitable than your industry peers? Are you stronger or weaker on your balance sheet than your industry peers? Gross profit by job. This is something I see that gets missed a lot, and it can mean the difference between legitimately a $2 million business and a $1 million business, similar to the example I gave before. How well are you doing when you do a project for a customer? What's the gross profit on that job? And are you looking at that and ways to improve it throughout the year? Or are you getting to the end of the year and going, what did we do wrong? And you've lost a lot of profit because you didn't account for change orders, or you didn't get the efficiency up of the crew, or whatever it is. There are things you can do to manage that throughout the year so that you don't lose cash flow all year long and shrink the value of your company. Performance consistency. A buyer is going to want to see that over time, the business is getting better. Now, there can be some cyclical nature to it. Some businesses are cyclical. The economy drops and they drop. But over time, you want to see an upward trajectory in the performance of your business. Here's something I see a lot, and I think that there is a bit of a copycat nature in pricing in some companies. Not all of them, but some of them copy their competitors. The problem with that is that that competitor over there may be going broke. So I would say in almost all instances, small and medium-sized businesses are better off to price based on better service or a niche that they're offering that nobody else offers, or just they're elite and they're doing something different than the big players, which are just pushing volume. You cannot almost always, you can almost never compete with the biggest players in your industry on pricing. That's just a fool's game. I'm a big proponent of Seth Godin. You want to read some of his blog posts. Low price is a race to the bottom. And what I see a lot of times when I'm valuing companies is that they're not pricing for profit. And their customers sometimes are head over heels for their work and may be happy to pay more, especially if they get even better service. They're happy to do that. So don't play the low price game. I don't think that's a battle you can win as a small and medium-sized business. I think that's a losing game. And I see underpricing a lot in the companies I value. I mean, even things you wouldn't expect. I valued a dental practice it's been a couple years back. This was a gifting scenario to a son, and it was a profitable practice. But what I saw over time is there was erosion in their gross profit margin because they hadn't adjusted their prices enough. And you may not think about gross profit on a dental practice, but there's costs. There's costs of the instruments and costs of the employees. I mean, there's real tangible costs of basically going to your mouth to do the service. Of course, there's overhead too, like rent and such. But really, what you want to measure with gross profit are direct labor and direct materials as your costs, and then of course your sales are your sales, and that difference is gross profit, roughly. And so it can happen in places where you might not expect it. Let's talk about growth. A quick admission: this slide was largely produced with ChatGPT. I did all the rest of myself, I promise. Not the gentleman pushing the rock up the hill, but the idea around the entrepreneur's paradox was something I put into ChatGPT, and it gave me this nice list of things, which I wordsmithed a little bit more and put the thing at the bottom. So I did use AI for this particular slide. What is the entrepreneur's paradox? What this means is that an early strength, that bootstrapping, that hard work, that sweat equity that got your company off the ground becomes a later weakness when you're trying to sell, when you're trying to grow. And what I'm talking about here is the impediments to growth. And I think these illustrate them very well. You're doing it all yourself. You have tight control. You say yes to every project, potential project that comes in the door. You're working crazy hours. The customer only knows you as the owner. You're the primary salesperson. What's that create later? All these problems over on the right. What I see, if the product or service is good, the business model is good, is that most of the time, the limits to growth are self-inflicted. I mean, that's the reality of it. That sounds a little harsh, but that's what I see. I've not seen this for years in accounting firms. Okay, we're guilty of this too. I don't have a traditional CPA practice, but I lived in that world for a long time. The partner hoards the book of business, and then they don't grow. They just stagnate because they don't delegate. They don't let anybody else talk to the clients. That's a real problem. So you hit a ceiling on growth. You can't grow. So that's the entrepreneur's paradox. And I think that illustrates growth limits. I mean, that if you're looking at your business and going, why aren't we growing? Why aren't we growing? Well, it's probably because you don't have everybody involved. And if you've got some real potential superstars on your team, you want to get them involved. If it wasn't already apparent, there is some overlap between the cash flow, growth, and risk factors, but I've tried to compartmentalize these as much as I can, but they don't really live in silos. Let's talk about risk, lowering risk. And again, some credit to this book here. You don't have the book, I recommend picking it up. You can get it on Kindle too, of course. Core processes documented. Document your core processes. And Traction makes the case that these are the ones you want to pay most attention to. You want to start with those owner-dependent processes that you can document and get yourself out of that seat. All right. 80-20 rule, Pareto principle. Work on the 20% that gives you 80% of the results. Keep it simple. And again, the book outlines this. It's just a few pages. Here's the thing, the key thing to understand. The book does not recommend going do A, then B, then C, then D. Like I push this keystroke, I push this. If you have people that are smart enough to pick stuff up, you can give them a broad-based set of instructions and they'll figure out the pieces in between over time. All right. And of course, you're going to work with them closely to take things off your plate as an owner. We call this in the valuation business a lot of times key person risk. It doesn't necessarily need to be the owner, but a lot of times it is the owner. And so if that person gets hit by a bus, that's the metaphor, they're gone. Does the business just fall apart like with Bob? All right. So what we're trying to do is lower that risk. You want to move as much away from the owner as possible. Okay, let's pause on this just a minute because this is really important. This is where I'm trying to bring these pieces together a little bit. And something I wrote a post on social media about this the other day too, and this is a strange thing, but I think it's true. I think there's also this misconception out there. I didn't put this on the misconception list because at some point you run out of paper, run out of slide space. I think that a lot of people, even in finance, think of selling a business like selling a house, and they're very different assets. You can drop the price on your house and you will likely get more buyers come in to look at it. That's how that works. That doesn't always work with a business. If there is nobody in the area with the expertise and the interest and the money and on and on and on, it doesn't really matter how low you drop the price, in my opinion. That's not suddenly just going to make people appear. You're willing to throw cold water on that idea. I just don't see that as something that works. And so, how do we combat that? This is what I see is the way you do it. You focus on employees that have the real chops, they have management potential, or they're already managing and they want to be part of the business. They're good apprentices or competitors. That's where I would focus your efforts because they're going to be more likely to understand your processes. Obviously, they're in the industry already, and they're going to accept that certain things are just messier. They're going to be willing to accept more of that than, say, somebody that's an outsider to the industry that is going to have a very steep learning curve to figure out what you do. And they're going to object to a lot more things, in my experience. They're going to object to a lot of problems that some things you're just not going to have time to stomp them all out. Goes right back to my good news success stories. I said in the opener, you may be a candidate to be bought by private equity or a public company, but I think it's a low probability event. And so I would focus a lot of your effort in this area. All right, let's summarize this. Your business is more likely to close and sell, but use this today as a guide to get you statistically at a higher possibility of being able to sell. No guarantees. I make no guarantees, but you don't want to end up like Bob for certain. You need a plan. Bury those misconceptions, fix the turnoffs, grade your marketing, sales, operations, and accounting, give them a letter grade, and then work towards getting yourself out of hopefully just one of those three key pieces. And the risk slide is one place you can go to move out of those three areas. One, hopefully, like I said, one of the three areas of the business. Hopefully, it's not two. I see a lot of my owners that are plugged into one of those three primary areas. That's what I see a lot. Sometimes they're the primary salesperson. Sometimes they're heavily involved in operations. I've got a lot of trade contractors I valued over the years. Sometimes those folks are really involved in an operations piece. You move the big three to drive value up. We talked about cash flow benchmarking to your industry, getting away from low price. You want to be the premium player in your industry if you can. That's a better way to put value into your company. You can grow the company by getting away from the entrepreneur's paradox. And then risk, which a lot of times revolves around key person risk of the owner, you're going to delegate that. Delegate those responsibilities that you're doing, document your processes, move those over to somebody else. You will, in my opinion, have a higher success rate with employees and competitors. 5 years is a great time to start. 10's even better. The reality is that running a business is tough, and it's challenging to find the time, but you have to make the time if you want to make this happen. Now, this is my broad-based plan that I think is a one size fits all is kind of a overstatement probably, but I didn't want to give you something that was so specific that you couldn't use it in different kinds of companies or different kinds of situations. So this is a broad plan that's bullet pointed that I think will help you a great deal. Whether you use an electronic calendar, a wall calendar, or whatever, block time every day, at least every working day, to work on your exit plan if that is what you're wanting to do. If you're wanting to sell the company, you're going to have sacred time that nobody can interrupt you unless it's time where you're working on, say, getting those core processes to another staff member or something like that. You're delegating management responsibilities. You're not going to want to just hide in your office, but this is sacred time where you're just working on this. And you're going to be specific about what you're doing with each block of time. Use this presentation as a guide, I hope. Work with professionals who've done this before. I mention this a lot. In fact, I get a lot of clients, they're almost embarrassed when they call me in some instances because they don't know what to do. And I always have to reassure them. I do my best to, hey, it's okay. Most people do this once in their life. It's all right. Okay. You don't expect to feel normal doing this. This is not something that you do every day. So it's okay to be uncomfortable doing it. If you're the business owner, that's why you want to work with people who've done it before. They've done it many times and they can help you through it. Draft the plan, even on a piece of notebook paper. It doesn't have to be perfect. Get something down on paper or a Word doc or whatever. Please don't lose it. So you want to get it into a computer that's backed up at some point in case the worst happens and your computer melts down or you have a fire or flood or something like that. But list all the potential buyers, brainstorm. Competitors, employees, I would say they're probably going to move to the top of the list. In the beginning, put them all down. I haven't talked much about when to get a business valuation up to this point. I'm going to give you my general philosophy on this, which is if you're ready to get out of the business, this sounds a little counterintuitive. If you're ready to get out of the business and you don't have the stomach to try to grow it or hit a target later in terms of the value you want to hit, I encourage you to find a buyer first instead. I get a lot of calls from people that say, I want to sell my business. I need a business valuation. And the problem with that is that as soon as I give it to you, it starts to get stale. And potentially months or even years go by before you can find a buyer. So that doesn't do my clients any good. Second reason is a business valuation is not an advertisement. It's not going to bring buyers. Conversely, I helped a group recently with 4 owners, and they had seen the person they bought out. It went south. He was dead within a year of them buying him out. And they said, I don't want that situation. So we're going to start doing our plan now. And so I valued their business because they wanted to know what it's worth now and what target they could hit by doing the stuff on this list at some point in the future. So it's worth 5 million. We want to hit 10 or whatever the number is. So very different situations. If you're out of gas, out of energy, it's generally in your best interest to start with a buyer instead of a valuation. That's been my experience. Attack the big 3 to hit the target. So that target that we're aiming at. Ask for help. It's okay to be stumped. Many entrepreneurs, myself included, we want to do it all ourselves. We don't want to feel silly. Get used to feeling silly. It's okay. You're not going to have all the answers. Document and delegate. That's that risk slide. And then start calling and setting meetings with your team, with prospective buyers. And then over time, you're going to refine that buyer list and update the plan as things change. Great Kevin Kelly quote, one of my favorites. Show me your calendar and I will tell you your priorities. It's not on the calendar. If it's not on my calendar, it doesn't exist. One thing I want to mention, and I'm getting tight on time, but I don't want to forget this. One of the biggest challenges with competitor buys are culture. So that's something you definitely want to think about. If the culture is not going to be a match, it could be a problem. And this particularly becomes a problem if you owner finance the deal and there's a sort of a headbutting between employees and ownership with the new buyer. And so that's something you really want. I would say you want to spend more time even thinking about the culture than the numbers, because the culture moves the numbers in a lot of cases. I'm going to leave you with this parting thought. I think I'm about 4 minutes to time. I want you to think of a childhood memory that you had, something that scared you and you pushed through and you did it anyway. And this is the one I thought of. You need to use your own, not mine. Don't use mine because mine is likely different from yours. Mine was jumping off the high dive at the Oakland pool in Oakland, Illinois. I remembered this very vividly when I thought about it. And I found this kid. He's not me. He's the one on the right. He's a stock photo. But this kid made me think of those days. And if you had asked me whether I was ready, I would have said no. I was not ready to jump off that high dive, but I did it anyway. And that's what this is. That's what you should feel about this. If you are waiting to be ready to sell your business, it's going to be too late. It just is. That's the sad reality of it. You're not going to be ready. You need to be like that kid that just took the jump off the diving board, because that's how you get it done. You push through when you're uncomfortable. With that, my sources are pretty extensive. We're not going to go through those. I will send the slides to everybody that attended. Thank you very much for your time. I will open it up for questions if anybody has any, and feel free to phone me, email me, get on my calendar. I'd like to talk to you. I haven't talked to as many people as I'd like to since COVID. Well, not everybody, but I think I think we're more back to normal than we were, but I would still like to see more of you, more of your smiling faces in person than I'm seeing right now. So don't be shy. Let's have lunch and see each other in person sometime when you can find the time to do it. I'm Josh Horn of Horn Valuation, and this is Selling Your Family Business. I'll open it up for chat if anybody has any. And I hope you have a great day.